Next, we're going to ask Dr. Rhoda, Dr. Ebrahim Rhoda. He says keep the doctor out. We can't do that. The reason why the doctor is there is because Dr. Ebrahim Rhoda has done the research.
Yes, my
Dr. Ebrahim Rhoda has done the research on the Strand area and knows each and every household in every street in the Strand. And for that, he earned his doctorate. So, Dr. Rhoda, please come and give us a little sketch of your research and of the people and I think institutions of Strand. All yours, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon. Goeiemiddag. I was asked to speak in Afrikaans. Is that okay with you? No, I'm only joking. I'm looking at the word at the back. Welcome to Muhammadiyah. There are three events, I would call it the confluence of three events that made this day possible today. The first one is the willingness of the principal, Mr. Ibrahim Jacobs and Abrams and his governing body, gave permission that the Cape Family Research Forum henceforth can have their meetings here on a monthly basis. That's the first event, and that took place in February. The second one, of course, is the willingness of our chairman, Shamil Hamildin, that was prepared to move from Newfields to Wynberg. And the third, I would say, spin-off would be the presence of WICA, Wynberg East Civic Association, because by coming to that meeting in February, it virtually improved the numbers of the forum because we were in hibernation because of COVID. There could be no functions. But because of so many people joining the forum and under the guidance of the forum, we took these people to the archives to train them how to do research. So maybe, second slide. There you are. And the purpose of my talk here today is to encourage people of Wynberg and area to write up their beautiful heritage. You have a rich history, and it has to be written up. Next slide. To this end, the Cape Family Research Forum was established in 2002 with the basic idea of encouraging people to trace their genealogy and write up their history about their families. And we go to the next slide. To that end, we went public in 2005 in the form of an eat and treat to make the Cape Family Research Forum known to the general public in Cape Town area. And here we see the function in the Athlone Civic in 2005. Next slide. In addition, in the foyer of the Civic Center, we had an exhibition of a photographic exhibition of the histories of communities, not only of the Strand, but of Cape Town, Salt River, you name it, Simonstown. Next slide. At that function, we raised money, and our purpose was not to enrich the organization with funds. So during COVID times, when things were very bad for many organizations in the community, we donated, and that I call our social responsibility, we donated 36,000 Rand to institutions in the community. Next slide. Since we started, the forum has been involved in most of the festivals of Voice of the Cape, whether it was on the track, whether it was at Faithieskraal, or whether it was at the Epping Market, or whether it was in Paarl at their festival. And here we see some of our members in the Epping Market. And what is important about this, and the next slide, all people came and they were so impressed to see their names in these books. And here I think we need to give a big hand to our chairman and the members of the forum who compiled Shamir Hamiddin. Give them a big hand for the hard work that they did on this. Right. Now people came and they were so excited looking at the book. Oh, my daddy's name is there, my grandfather's name is there. But it stopped there. And then we find people came to the archives, but they didn't know how to access the records. So what the forum did then, we decided we are going to train people how to access the records of the archives. Go to the next slide. And this was the very first workshop that we held in 2012 with Professor Newton King of the History Department of UWC and the Argus columnist with the name of Jackie Loos. They were our guest speakers. That was our very first one. And after that, it never stopped. Second slide. We focused by putting something on the site of the forum, and we catered for people across the spectrum of race and religion. It was not confined to Muslims. Everybody came as reflected in this one that you see here. Next one. To be able to do research in your community is not the work of an individual because the task is too vast. It is teamwork. And this is what we did in the Strand. I was also involved with the primary school, and these are all some of my ex-pupils. And we enlisted their expertise, go into the community and find photos. And you know, in those days, you had those big cameras, but they took small photos. And we collected these photos, and luckily, one thing about the Muslim, when there's somebody, a guy working at the photographic place, he is your access. And so we had a lot of these photos blown up to A4 size and had it beautifully mounted. Let's take the next slide. And this was the result of our effort. It took a couple of months, but it was collective. It was the community effort. Next slide. In addition to that, we took it a step further, and here again, one of our ex-pupils came to the fore. His name is Faisal Daniels, and he wrote a letter to Voice of the Cape. Can't we record our history from our own perspective so that the communities out there can listen over the radio? And for 10 months, myself and the late Maulana Yusuf Karan, we did the research in the archives. The late Butamaili Jacobs was our host, and Faisal Daniels was our facilitator, ex-pupil of mine. He came to pick us and took us to the studio. And for 10 months, over every fortnight, we related the history. This is just a sample of what Wynberg can be doing. Next one. Not only did we focus on the Strand, people from Worcester came to the forum, and we trained them in the archives, especially under the leadership of Enver Saddam. And they also started to write up their own history from the perspective of our people. And here we see Enver Saddam telling about the early Islam in Worcester, way back in the 1840s. There was already a Jama'ah in Worcester. Next slide. Some of this work was published in the local Muslim newspaper. And you'll see later what WECO has also done. The next slide. In addition, we were approached by Lutfi Umar of the Salt River Heritage Society, and they also wanted to write up their own history in Salt River area. I attended the first function there in that old building in Salt River. Was it the Railway Institute or something like that? I don't know, but in any case, And we took their people to the archives, and they were given basic training of how to access the records. Now, the most important records, if you want to trace your origin or your families, are the death registers, the birth registers, excuse me. Ek puasa eintlik dan moet ek 'n bietjie water drink. So, after having trained them, they started on their own. The next slide. This is the conference room at the archives. We normally took about 20 to 25 people at a time. And the bottom picture shows some of the members of the Salt River Heritage Society. This is the work that they're doing this year. And there's one important picture there on the beach of Woodstock. About 100 years before Van Riebeeck came, a Portuguese guy, Admiral de Almeida, with his crew of his ship, they were murdered on the beach by the local Khoisan people with stones and sticks. That's about roughly 1542. They are busy with their own history, writing it up. Next one. Then we came to Weka, and we took the people of Wynberg to the archives, and we trained them also. En alhamdulillah, sien ons al die mooi mense van Wynberg daar sien. Then, the next one is the committee of Weka. Ek sien 'n lag met hy Jonas daar agter, want hy's groot op die picture hier met sy vrou, Munira. Then we see the work that they've done this far. Next one, they went public. They put it in a local newspaper. So hulle is op die Sirata Mustaqim. They're on the right road. They're doing it. The next one, the beautiful program that they put up here for today. The next one, how do you go about writing? Our experience is people won't buy expensive coffee table type books of 400 Rand. They will spend 400 on Ocean Basket, yes, but they won't buy a book. So our strategy was, write little booklets. But in this little booklet, you can reflect the history of your community. And the very first one that we wrote was not even 10 pages, and it was titled The Javanese Connection. Because from the oral history, now this is so important, from the oral history we came to know that most of our imams came from Java. In fact, my wife's great-grandfather, Hatip Railun, came from what we call Batavia, today Jakarta. Way back in the 1860s, he came to settle at the Strand. So we could prove it with documentation. And we wrote it up. And that little booklet of less than 10 pages was sold for 5 Rand. And all the money went to the building project of the Muslim primary school. Like you have a school here, you can do it for your school. Next one. Then I wrote a little one in English. The Muslim community and historical overview, that was about roughly 40, 50 pages, a little bit longer, more detailed. And it was sold, and the money was also donated to the Muslim school for their building project. But then we were approached by the Dutch Reformed Church through the offices of Dr. Elise Morkel. Can't we have a bridge building evening with the Muslim community in the Strand? But, Mr. Rhoda, but then you must write the book in Afrikaans, want in die Duits gereformeerde kerk praat hulle net Afrikaans. So we wrote the book in Afrikaans. They did all the funding, and with that function in the town hall, we had traditional Malay dishes. We invited the Cape Malay choir, and we raised, that evening, we raised 23,000 Rand, also for the building project of the school. The next one, this is my beauty. This lady spoke about Wynberg, where people stayed. Now in this little book, it took me about 2 years. With the assistance of the community, I couldn't do it alone. I went to people to show me who stayed where across the spectrum of race and religion. Muslim, non-Muslim, house for house, street for street. Because like District 6, we were also forcefully removed from the CBD. The only remains today are the three masajids standing in the CBD as symbols of defiance of the heinous laws of apartheid. They still stand there today. So, to market the book, and here again it's a community effort. We went to all the churches, to the schools, to the rugby clubs, to the cricket clubs. You sell the book. And when you sell the book, you retain 50% of the sales. Wie gaat nie sê? And on that one day, we only had 800 copies printed. That very same morning when the book was launched, all 800 went out. And the community benefit the institutions to the tune of 20,000 rand. Next one. This is the big one. And we have enough qualified people in Wynberg. Students of the Muhammadiyah, who went to high school, who are at university, who are able to write up the history academically, so that it can be recorded in the annals of history. This is the Wynberg history academically recorded. I had no degrees, but for 3 years I went to the archives. I virtually lived in the archives for 3 years. And we were given basic training by UCT under the leadership of Professor Nigel Warden, Dr. Alan Banks of UWC, and Dr. Susie Newton King of UWC. They gave us basic training for 1 month. It was subsidized by the National Research Foundation. They gave us each 5,000, but SARS took away a big chunk of that also. But it was to cover your traveling expenses to the archives and those who came from Sierras. They selected 7 guys from slave areas, from Sierras, Simondium, from Caledon, from Simonstown, and from Somerset West area. I was among the 7 chosen to be trained. And in that 1 month, I succeeded because we had the oral history. My one aunt, I interviewed her when she was 90 years old in April 1990. And I asked her, please tell me, who were our forebears? Not only ours, but the other families in the community. You know, she couldn't read and write. Her name is Rahima Crombie. But Allah endowed her with an encyclopedic memory. And all those names that she mentioned, which I included in my thesis, I found documentary evidence. Because if you lived, then you must have died. And I found their records in the archives. And it's included in the thesis which I wrote. At the age of 68, you're never too old. I graduated without any degrees, a master's degree with distinction, because it is the first ever study of a Muslim community academically, from its origin right up to 1928. Now, 1928 is the focus area. 1822 is the year in which I found there was the Imam already at Mustard Bay, which was the name of the Strand. 1928 is the year in which we built our own Muslim schools like Muhammadiyah in 1928. So that was the focus area. But nobody's going to buy this big book, this thesis. So what I did, the next slide, I converted the thesis into a readable book for the man in the street. And in addition, I added another 38 years. Now, whether there was a good reason for that. So the book would now be from 1822 out to 1966, which is the year in which the Strand Muslim Council was formed, when the 4 Jamaas amalgamated to form one solid umbrella body to run the affairs of the community. I was the secretary for the first 10 years, 1966. So why did I add another 38 years? So that I could include as many families. And we could trace families right from 1822, like the Tamur family who came from Timor, like the Wanda family who came from Sumbawa in Indonesia. So we included all these families, because if you include all these families, not only the la-di-da, from the poorest of the poor, we went around. If you had a phone, we would phone you and ask you. If you didn't have a phone, we went to your house to ask you, tell me, who were your forebears? And we wrote it up. It's more than 100 families. And that is part of the marketing. If you know that your family is written up in that book, you're going to buy that book. Sure. Luckily, a friend of mine has got a business. He gave me 15 receipt books. And we went out in the community. Let the poorest of the poor even pay it off. And by the time when we launched the book, in 2014 in the Strand Town Hall, we also invited the Consul General of Indonesia, because our Imam came from Semarang, a big port city on the east coast of Central Java. And he came with his retinue, and some of the dignitaries also came to this launch. And one of my friends, Mahdi Muhammad, said, he said, no, Mr. Rhoda, I've never seen such a big launch. On that day, 400 copies signed with your name in it and fully paid went out. So our marketing was tops. And on that day, we made Nia, a Sadaqatul Jariyah from the side of my wife. Let's give 1,000 copies to the community. So 400 was sold. There was still a remainder of 600. Right? So wherever I gave a talk, where I came in the areas where the community is more affluent, the price went up. I mean, it's only fair. And eventually, we raised a total of 175,000 rand. And that was invested with Oasis, the Al Baraka Bank, and eventually that total came to 200,000. For the past 6 years, we have been using that money to assist the widows of our imams and Khalifa teachers. You know, the Khalifas, the madrasa teachers, with long service. Ek praat te veel. Right? The next slide. So, in 2016, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Strand Muslim Council. Originally, there were 9 members. My father-in-law was the chairman. In fact, he asked me to marry his daughter, to tell you the truth. I was the secretary. In any case, so jointly we wrote up the history of the council from 1966 until 2016 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Strand Muslim Council. Next one. This little booklet we were supposed to give out last night, the grade 11s of our community, they invite all the grade 12s. And the Strand Muslim Council gives each grade 12 a free copy so that the youth, because you don't see youth here, so that the youth can be empowered with the knowledge of their beautiful heritage. We've been doing this for the past 6 years, since 2017. But because of, thanks to ESCOM, we couldn't have the function last night. I brought some of these books, just 10 copies, with the idea that if I sell it today at 50 rand, I will have enough money to print copies for next year for the grade 12s, inshallah. And then lastly, I think this is the beauty. You see that guy there? He is my paternal great-great-great-grandfather. His name is Karl David Wenzel. My paternal grandmother's name was Johara. She died in 1917, giving birth to her 11th child at the age of 35. So my grandpa had overtime gewerkt. There was no TV, in any case. She died in August 1917, and the baby Abdul Malik survived until August 1917. Only 3 of the 11 children survived. The one was my father. He died now in 96 at the age of 89. The other one was the narrator of the whole history, my aunt Rahima Krombi. She died at the age of 90. And the third one was Fatima Antinoni. She died at the age of 85. I wanted to know what did that. I found all the other children, the 8 who died, and most of them died in infancy. Some of them from diarrhea, 2 of them lived up to the age of 7 years. I traced all of those 8 children in the archive. So you see, it can be done, but it needs a lot of sabr. You know the word sabr? Patience. And secondly, you need the passion to do it. So this German guy, when Jofara's grandfather died at the Strand in 1885, he was 70 years old, which means he was born in 1815. 1815 is smack in the slave period. But on his death notice, which I found in the archives, it stated that Jofara's grandfather, his name was Khalil, that his father was Wenzel and his mother was Lina Wenzel. Oh, and I became curious. In 2006, I gave a talk in the archives, and there was a German in the audience. And when I said that one of the pioneering families of the Muslim community of the Strand are the Wenzels, and the German stood up at the end and he said, "What German is Wenzel?" They said, "Oh, you're so right, but they love the Javanese women." That's what I told him. I made a joke. But in 2018, I took this joke seriously, and I went back to the archives. Luckily, I kept all my records. And I found that in 1808, there was a German in the Somerset West area. Now, how do I know? Because they have the field cornet, that's a local authority that did the census every year for tax purposes. And I found this German was resident in the Somerset West area, and his name was Karl David Wenzel. And I had to make sure he's German. And I went back to the archives and I traced that his grandfather came in 1742 as a cartographer working for the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. So I know, oh, this guy is German, there's no doubt about that. The second one is Lina. Who is Lina? I had to find Lina. Now, as I told you, we were given training in the archives how to access the slave records, right? And I went to the records of the farms in that area. And one of the richest families in those areas were the Morkels. They virtually owned the whole of the HH Basin, today known as the Helderberg Basin. And I found Lina. Lina was a maid in the house of the Morkels. And this guy was on the same farm. 1798, and this is the beauty where the picture comes in. Lady Anne Barnard came to the farm of the Morkels. But by then the Morkels, they made themselves conveniently absent because they were not very happy with the takeover by the British of the Cape in 1795. So what they did, they locked up the food. In other words, this Lady Anne Barnard wasn't welcome on our farm. But they left this youngster, Karl David Wenzel, with a few slaves to look after the farm. And in the debate that took place between herself and this young man, she learned from him that he was a teacher, teaching the children because there were no public schools. The first public school came in Somerset West, 1834. So he was a teacher on the farm teaching the children of the Morkels. And at the same time, he was also employed later. This is 1798, he was 18 years old. But then reading further, I found that he was hired by the Dutch Reformed Church in 1820 to be the voorleser. You know, the guy who reads the number of the psalms or hymns they're going to sing out of the psalm book. He was the voorleser. So, but in 1821, they sacked him because they said they didn't have enough money to pay him. Well, I was wondering, why did they sack him? Because that is the time when I suspect he had an affair with Lina. Because by then he had already fathered one child. And that child's name was Jephthah. Born in 1815, the very same year in which Khalil was born. Now the beauty of Khalil is when he was set free, to cut a long story short, when he was set free in 1838, he went down to Mossad Bay, he became a fisherman. There was an imam, he embraced Islam, and his name was named Khalil. In a similar fashion, My forebears, we know her name was Kandaza from oral history. She was born in 1791. And she had two sons by Kalamuddin Rhoda who came from Cape Town. And the one was born 1819 and 1824. The one was Leander, the slave name, the other was Jacobus. But when they became Muslim, the Imam changed the one's name. Leander became Fakhreddin Rhoda. I traced all the records. And the other one, Samuddin, our great-grandfather, he was named Samuddin. So it was not uncommon for slaves to embrace Islam. And that is how the Muslim brothers came about in the Strand also. So the sad part about this is Khalil Wenzel had elder son Ismuddin and the younger brother Hamad. Both of them died on the Robben Island in the leper hospital. You know, leprosy. Because I do recall that they were called upon by the local magistrate, come, we're going to take you to Robben Island so that you can be healed from leprosy. And they refused. They said no, because originally they were all gathered in the jail in the Strand. So those old people thought, hulle gaan ons op die tronk sit op Robben Island. They refused to go, Ismuddin. But eventually he convinced them, he took them one by one, and eventually they left by a horse cart to Somerset West to the station, and they went to Robben Island. The one died in 1893, that Ismuddin, he was 47, and his younger brother died in 1900, he was 26. The other part of Jochara and the children, time won't allow me to go into much detail, but if you are interested, I have donated 50 copies of this book to WECO. And whatever book they sell, they can take half the money for WECO. And with these words, because it's almost time for the word, with these words, oh, this is Jochara. On the left is a baby, and on the right is Rahima, who died at 90, the one that I interviewed. And on the table is my father, Usman Rhoda. And on the left is Auntie Noni Fatima. Auntie Noni also died in my house in 1988 at the age of 85. I would say she was the most difficult vrouw wat ooit op die aarde gelewe. I want to end off with this light note, because one day when I came home, dus my vrou rooi blas nou, ek weet as my vrou blas, as iets verkeerd is. En toe ek nog so staan, ek kom net van die school, I stood with my satchel, you know. And she says to me, Ebrahim, I'm going to kill your aunt. I said, oh my God, what did she do now again? What am I going to say? And I went softly up to her and said, don't worry, I'm going to help you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We say a huge shukran to Dr. Ebrahim Rhoda for that beautiful talk. Dr. Rhoda, fantastic. And this is what they say, you know, if you can imagine it, then it can happen. So it says Weinberg is Civic Association appreciates Ebrahim Rhoda for the research, documentation and preservation of history's untold stories. Weinberg Rewind, 24 September 2022. Shukran so much. That was really beautiful. I thoroughly enjoyed the lightheartedness as well as the history. And it makes us all want to get to know our history and our forebears, inshallah.
I just want to correct one thing. I've been given an honorary doctorate by Mr. Abrams now. Shukran for that. I'm not doctor. I just did a master's degree. Ek het nog nie my PhD doen nie. Miskien nog eendag, inshallah.
I've got it recorded.